I need you to look at something. This is a skull from a mass grave in Yorkshire. He was one of tens of thousands of Englishmen who killed each other on a single day in the deadliest battle ever fought on English soil. And today we talk about the builder that discovered the bones by accident, the mental breakdown from a king that started a civil war, and a genius arrow trick that changed the entire battle. This is the Battle of Towton. My name's Joe and this is one Buried Earth video that is well worth your time. Do subscribe if you enjoy. So, in July 1996, a builder digging foundations behind Towton Hall, which is a country house in the village where the battle was fought, they hit human bones, then more and more. What emerged was a mass grave containing at least 43 individuals. Every skeleton in it carried weapon wounds. Almost every one had more than one wound. I'll come back to this discovery later in the video because not only is it absolutely insane what was discovered and the state of the skeletons, but also the Battle of Towton is quite complicated to understand, and the state of England at this time was just so messy and complicated. To understand why 60,000 Englishmen killed each other on Palm Sunday morning, 1461, you have to go back another 8 years, to a summer's day in 1453, when the King of England lost his mind. Henry VI was 32 years old. He had been king since he was 9 months old. In August 1453, he suffered a total mental breakdown. He couldn't walk or speak. He didn't recognise his own wife or newborn son. He stayed like that for over 18 months. With no king functioning, the country fell apart from the top down. Two rival branches of the royal family, both descended from Edward III, saw an opportunity. The House of Lancaster held the throne through Henry. The House of York had a claim through a different line. Henry recovered enough to be king in name, but not in fact. His French-born queen, Margaret of Anjou, took over the real business of ruling, but she wasn't liked, but she was effective, and she was ferocious in defending her husband's throne and her infant son's inheritance. The Yorkist claim was led by Richard, Duke of York. In 1460, he forced a compromise called the Act of Accord. Henry would remain king for his lifetime. After that, Richard and his sons would inherit. Margaret refused to accept this. On December the 30th, 1460, Richard of York was killed in Battle of Wakefield. His head was cut off, mounted on a pike, and displayed on the gates of York wearing a paper crown. His 18-year-old son Edward was in the Welsh marches when he'd heard. He was tall, handsome, and now the head of the House of York. He had also inherited his father's claim to the throne. Henry VI was still the crowned king, but his mental illness had destroyed the confidence and faith of his ability to rule by many. Edward began his march towards London. A Lancastrian army advancing out of Wales threatened his position. He defeated them at Mortimer's Cross, then continued his march for London. Meanwhile, Henry VI and Margaret's army were refused entry into London, forcing the Lancastrians to withdraw north. The 18-year-old new king marched north to meet them. His father was 9 weeks dead and his crown was just 9 days old. He had gambled everything on a battle that he hadn't fought yet. He rode north through weather that was unseasonably cold. His army marched in stages, gathering reinforcements from towns along the way. By March the 27th, he had reached Pontefract in Yorkshire, 15 miles from where the Lancastrians were waiting. The two forces were the biggest that England had ever seen. Modern historians estimate somewhere between 40,000 and 80,000 men in total across both sides. Some contemporary accounts claimed over 100,000. Even the lower estimates put this battle in a category by itself for medieval England. But what was different about Towton wasn't just its size, it was what the two sides represented. Every noble family of significance in England had already picked a side. Both claimants to the throne were presented and represented. Both sides believed the losers would not survive politically. Some of them believed the losers would just not survive at all. What was ordered explicitly in Edward's proclamation and later in the traditional accounts was that no prisoners were to be taken, no ransom would be paid, and no quarter would be given. This was to be the battle to end the Civil War, and in a sense, it was. But before we continue, let me tell you about one of the most stressful emails I've ever opened. It was a message that knew me, my name, part of my address, and my phone number. All of it was correct. It didn't feel like a scam because they had the right details. I phoned my dad worried, and after some Googling we worked out that it was a scam, but it almost got me. It's scary how much of me was just out there, and that's why Incogni is sponsoring today's video, and honestly, it's brilliant. Companies you've never heard of are holding your name, your address, your phone number, and selling it on. That's what scammers buy to make phishing emails, a text, or a call look real. It's also how your details get leaked whenever a big company you've never heard of gets hacked. You did nothing and you're still in the pile. What Incogni does is goes and gets that data taken down for you. This is my actual account on Incogni. It's gone after 46 of these companies already, and 32 have already wiped me off completely. You can try it at incogni.com/buried earth with code BURIEDEARTH. And one of the features that I really rate is their custom removal feature. On the Unlimited and Family Unlimited plans, you can spot yourself on a random people search website, point Incogni at it, and their team will sort out the rest. Incogni.com/buried earth, that's code BURIEDEARTH, BURIEDEARTH, and you will get 60% off an annual plan. They can't harm you if they can't find you. I'll pin a link to Incogni in the description and the comment section. Right, now back to the episode. On the evening of March the 27th, both armies were within striking distance of each other. The Yorkist force was around Pontefract, the Lancastrian force held the higher ground north of the crossings at Ferrybridge, blocking the road north. To get across the River Aire, the Yorkists needed the Ferrybridge crossing. On the morning of March the 28th, Edward sent his cousin Lord Fitzwalter to secure it. Nobody in either army knew that the battle they were about to fight would be remembered as the worst day in English military history, but some of them died before they even got to it. March the 28th, 1461, somewhere before dawn, Lord Fitzwalter and his men had crossed the bridge at Ferrybridge overnight and were resting on the north bank. The Lancastrian force under Lord Clifford, the same Clifford whose men had killed Edward's father and younger brother at Wakefield, came down the road from the north and hit them by surprise. Fitzwalter was killed. His men were either killed or forced back across the bridge. The first skirmish of the campaign had gone to the Lancastrians. The Yorkists on the south bank rallied. They pushed back across the crossing and secured the north side. Clifford's forces withdrew, and Clifford himself retreated along the road towards the Lancastrian main body. He didn't make it though. Somewhere south of the village of Saxton, in a small valley called Dintingdale, Clifford stopped to drink some water and removed his helmet or loosened something similar. A single arrow from a Yorkist scout or forward archer struck him in the throat. He died within minutes. One of the most experienced Lancastrian commanders was dead the day before the main battle. By the evening of the 28th, both sides had bloodied each other in preliminary fighting that would later be folded into the story of Towton itself. The night that followed was cold. Snow began falling overnight. The two armies slept in their positions, cold and exhausted now. On either side of the plateau, between the villages of Towton and Saxton, these soldiers were struggling. Palm Sunday, the day before Easter week, dawned grey and absolutely freezing. The 29th, 1461, approximately 9 in the morning, both armies formed up on the plateau. The Yorkists faced north, the Lancastrians faced south. Between them lay perhaps 300 metres of open ground, cut across by shallow depression called Towton Dale. The Lancastrian army was larger and held the higher ground, but the weather turned against them. The wind was blowing to the south. It carried a heavy snowstorm directly into the Lancastrian faces. They could barely see the Yorkist line that was just 300 metres away, let alone shoot accurately at it. The Yorkist archers were commanded by an experienced captain named William Falkenberg. According to the traditional account preserved in Edward's Hall Chronicle, Falkenberg noticed the weather and made a tactical decision that changed this entire battle. His archers stepped forward. They shot one volley. The volley fell short of the Yorkist line but reached the Lancastrian archers. Then the Yorkists stepped back out of range. The Lancastrian commanders, unable to see clearly, ordered their archers to return fire. Their arrows shot into the wind. With snow in the archers' eyes, the arrows fell short. They landed on empty ground. The Lancastrians shot their entire supply of arrows into the snow. It hit nobody. Then Falkenberg's Yorkist archers walked forward, gathered up the fallen enemy arrows, and shot them right back at the men that just fired them. The Lancastrians were being killed by their own arrows. They had two options: stand and die under the shooting, or advance across the killing ground and force a melee they might actually survive. They chose to advance. The Lancastrian line came down the slope through the snowstorm and hit the Yorkist front line hard. What followed lasted hours. The weapons on both sides in 1461 were designed for close quarters killing. English men-at-arms carried poleaxes, which is about a 6-foot polearm with an axe blade on one side and a hammer face on the other. A spike sat at the top for thrusting. Poleaxes could crush a helmet or hook a man off of his feet. Common infantry carried bills, which were curved cutting blades on a long shaft. Men-at-arms wore full-plate armour or brigandines. Archers wore what they could afford. The fighting at Towton was line against line for hour after hour. No decisive breakthrough, no moment of brilliance, just tens of thousands of men swinging heavy weapons at each other in a snowstorm, until one side broke. For most of the day, the side that looked like it was breaking was the Yorkists. Just the numbers advantage on the Lancastrian side began to tell. The Yorkist line was pushed back. Edward, the 18-year-old king, was in the front rank on foot, trying to hold the centre together. In some accounts, he lost his banner temporarily and had it recovered by his men. By the early afternoon, the Yorkist right flank was wavering. If the Lancastrians could turn that flank, the battle was over. Edward would be dead or fleeing, and the civil war would end with the Lancastrians winning. Then, somewhere around midday or shortly after, the Duke of Norfolk arrived. Norfolk was one of Edward's key supporters. He had been unwell and had been marching more slowly than the main force. He was late to the battle, but he brought a substantial body of fresh Yorkist troops from the south, and he arrived onto the exact part of the field where Edward needed him the most, which was that wavering right flank. The Lancastrian left, which had been driving forward, was now hit in the side by fresh troops, and it began to crumble. Once one section of the line broke, panic spread quickly. Neither side had been able to end the fight cleanly for hours. Now the Lancastrian formation, tired and stretched, started coming apart. The Yorkist advance turned into a push. The order that had been given at the start of the day, that no quarter would be given, now had its effect. The 15th century chronicler, John de Wohan, writing in France not long after the battle, described what followed with a single line that has been quoted ever since. In his account, at Towton, father did not spare son. The killing that started when the Lancastrian line broke went on for a few hours. It reached its worst not on the battlefield itself, but in the country beyond it. The Lancastrian retreat headed north and west. Their best escape route led down off the plateau, across the low meadow, toward a small stream called Cockbeck. The meadow was where the killing turned into slaughter. Contemporary and later chronicles describe this section of the battle with a specific set of images. The stream bank was steep. The men on the plateau were being pursued by Yorkist cavalry and infantry. Men who had reached the stream had to cross it or die. The stream was cold and running fast, deep enough to matter in armour. Edward Hall, writing decades later, described a scene in which the dead piled so high at the crossing that fleeing Lancastrians used the corpses of their own men as a bridge to get across. This later became known as the Bridge of Bodies. It's a literal detail, not a neutral report, but the underlying reality it points at is what always happens in a medieval rout at a river. Men on foot in armour being caught by fast attackers at a bottleneck do not survive. The stream would later be remembered in local tradition as running red for days afterwards. Among the named Lancastrian casualties in the rout was Henry Percy, 3rd Earl of Northumberland, one of the most senior nobles of the northern faction. Andrew Trollope, who had been a key military commander for the Lancastrians, was killed on the battlefield. Randolph, Baron Dacre, was also killed on the battlefield itself, reportedly by an arrow, briefly while removing his helmet to drink water. These guys just don't learn. He would be buried nearby, and the memorial cross that still stands today in Towton is traditionally linked to his death. The killing continued until nightfall. By the time it stopped, most of the senior Lancastrian command was dead or captured. Thousands of ordinary men were lying between the plateau and the town of Tadcaster, just 10 miles west. Henry, Margaret of Anjou, and the young Prince Edward, the Lancastrian royal family, had been at York, just several miles behind the front line. When word reached them that the battle was lost, they fled north to Scotland with a small escort. Margaret would spend the majority of the next 10 years trying to reverse the outcome. Edward, the 18th-year-old Yorkist king, now held the field. His throne, uncertain when he had marched out of London, was now secure. His father and brother were still dead, and his mother was in London waiting for the news, but the country belonged to him now. And on the ground behind him, the process dealing with the dead began. 535 years later, a builder digging foundations behind a country house would run onto the results. This is where things get really interesting, guys, about the archaeology of this Battle of Towton. So, Towton Hall is a country house in the small Yorkshire village of Towton, just about half a mile south of where the battle was fought. It has stood in various forms since the medieval period. In the summer of 1996 though, the owners wanted to extend the kitchen. Under the English planning law, before building work like that can happen on ground that might hold some archaeology, a watching brief has to be maintained. The builder, working with an archaeological monitor, broke ground in July 1996. Almost immediately, the ground started to give up human bones. Then more and more. What emerged from the ground was a mass grave containing at least 43 individuals. Later revisited estimates put the number of skeletons from the immediate Towton Hall find at over 60 individuals. Additional excavations in 2001 and 2004 recovered even more remains from the battlefield itself and from other adjacent locations. The bones were excavated by Yorkshire archaeologists and sent to the University of Bradford for detailed analysis. In 2000, they published the results in a volume called Blood Red Roses. It was revised and expanded in 2007. It remains the foundational scientific work on medieval battle trauma in English archaeology. The Towton grave changed how medieval combat was understood. Before the 1996 discovery, most knowledge of 15th century battle wounds came from written sources and manuscript illustrations. Now, there was 43 or more actual men who had been killed in a real battle. Every skeleton showed weapon injuries. Almost every one of them had multiple wounds. The Bradford team was able to identify specific weapons from the wounds. Swords, poleaxes, warhammers, daggers, arrows. They could even identify the age, at death, and sex. They could identify signs of previous injuries, and the signs of the hard lives that these men had led even before the battle. They could identify patterns of wounding that suggest what had happened to these specific individuals in their final minutes. And one of the men in the grave had a story that ran deeper than the day that he died. The individual catalogued as Towton 16 was in his late 40s or early 50s when he died. That made him older than most of the other men in the grave. His skeleton showed the marks of a hard, physical life, heavy muscle attachments on his upper arms, wear on his spine and old fractures that had healed. He had been a labourer or a soldier, and on the left side of his lower jaw, there was a healed weapon injury. Someone had struck him with a blade, probably years or even decades before Towton. The cut had gone through the bone. It had healed, but the healing had left visible damage. A section of the jawbone that would have been distorted, and probably a massive scar and disfigurement that changed how his face looked for the rest of his life. By the looks of it, this guy looked gnarly. He had survived though, and he had gone on living. In 2007, researchers produced a facial reconstruction of Towton 16 based on the skull. Their work showed a man in middle age whose face carried the mark of an old wound clearly. He would have been recognisable in the crowd. He would have been someone people remembered. At Towton, someone hit him twice more in the head with a heavy weapon, probably a poleaxe. The wounds were on the front left of his forehead and the left temporal bone. Either one of the blows would have killed him. He had survived one weapon strike years earlier that had marked him for the rest of his life, but he didn't survive the second one. Then his body was thrown into a pit with 42 or more other people on ground behind a house that hadn't been built yet. His face was reconstructed in 2007. His story is now taught in medieval osteology classes. Which brings us back to the question I asked at the start. 28,000 dead. That's the figure from the medieval chronicles. It's in the Yorkist Herald's letter written within days of the battle, and in Edward IV's own official proclamation of the City of London. It wasn't made up later, it was what people believed at the time. But what did it count? A recent argument of the archaeologist Tim Sutherland, who had spent decades working on the Towton battlefield, points out something important. The 28,000 figure probably referred to the total casualties of the entire campaign. Ferrybridge on the 28th, Dingtingdale later that day, and the main battle on the 29th, and the miles of river killing after, all folded together. Sutherland's revised estimate of Towton itself is much lower, somewhere between the range of 2,800 or 3,800 dead on the actual battlefield itself. But that's still a huge number for a single day of medieval fighting, but it's a factor of 10 different from the traditional figure. The truth is that we will probably never know the exact amount of den that died at the Battle of Towton, but what we do know is that the contemporaries believed that the killing was on an exceptional scale. That belief made its way into the chronicles, and the chronicles that have now shaped what we have understood of that battle for over 500 years. The bones in the Towton mass grave don't tell us the total number, but what they do tell us is what the killing looked like when it was happening. After the battle, Edward IV fully became king. He would rule, with one short interruption, for the next 22 years. Some years later, his brother, who had become Richard III, built a chapel at Towton. Its purpose was to pray for the souls of the men who had died at the battle, on both sides. The chapel was never completed though. The foundations of what may have been the building have been identified near the battlefield in recent decades. The battlefield itself is still walked today. There is a memorial cross by the road, traditionally linked to Lord Dacre. Towton 16 is in the University of Bradford's collection. His reconstructed face was published in 2007. Anyone who wants to see him can just look him up. The battle he died in was probably not as big as the chronicles claimed, but it was still bad enough that the king who won it thought his brother should found a chapel for the souls of the dead. And whichever number turns out to be right, Some of them are still in the ground today. And that's it from me, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video on Buried Earth. My name's Joe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the video. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, and consider subscribing to Buried Earth to be notified on our next upload. On screen right now, 2 videos I think you're going to absolutely love.